Hey everyone, welcome back to the Global Medical Device Podcast. My name is Etienne Nichols. I'm the host for today's episode. Today, we're diving into one of the most critical yet often misunderstood parts of medical device development, which is the front end of innovation. Joining me to talk about the front end of innovation is Stuart Grant, who's the founder and principal consultant of Archetype MedTech. Stuart has over 2 decades of experience leading MedTech product innovation, including senior leadership at Johnson & Johnson, where he steered teams through complex regulatory transformations like the EMDR. And now at Archetype, he now helps companies around the world to navigate the toughest questions that determine whether a product's actually going to make it to market. So in this conversation, we're going to unpack what the front end really means, where it sits in the product innovation process, and how teams can balance creativity with structure. Um, what did I miss, though? I'm sure there's lots of different things that we could go with your background and your experience. How are you doing today, Stuart?
I'm good, Etienne. Thank you for having us on. Yeah, what did you miss? Not much. That's pretty much my career in a nutshell. I've spent over 20 years working in medtech in J&J, developing mostly orthopedic devices and some surgical. In that time, I've worked in the US and in China and here in the UK, doing just talking to people, developing products. And this is where what we're going to about today is the front end innovation, right? And it's about what I did my doctoral research on. So when I came back to the UK 8 years ago, I decided to start my PhD, do it part time, and I was thinking about what subject in product development I was going to do, and I was like, well, let's think about something that they call fuzzy front end and what this thing is, and try to apply some of my experience over the years doing the front end and then start to understand the theory around it and what the actual academics are saying about front end. So I can share some of that with you today.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about, I mean, I think we should start with some definitions. What is the front end? Can we define that?
Yeah, sure. So um, if you think about the entire process of innovation, so you start with basic science right at the beginning with universities of researching something, then it moves into applied science, where they're actually putting that science into, in our case, medical device products. Um, and that point, usually companies start taking over from the applied science and start taking on those technologies, those patents. And between that applied science and new product development, the part that we know that inputs, outputs, verification, validation, design, transfer, and commercialization, that new product development phase, in between there is what we call the front end. And it's got a terrible name. The front end
Hmm.
really doesn't mean much, but is what came about 20 years ago. So it's where the innovation teams start talking to customers, understanding the problem they're trying to solve, looking at the business case in the market, and just trying to figure out what unmet clinical need in medical devices, our case, what we're trying to do. And it's really specifying that problem before it moves into the product development phase. So, to give you a little bit of history, back in the 90s, it was called the fuzzy front end, which you might have heard of, which is just sort of came about. It sort of grew out of this bit between applied science and product development. And that's why it's termed the fuzzy front end. And as we've moved through in the last 30 years, researchers have gained more experience and said, well, it's not fuzzy anymore. We think we know a lot about what we're doing now. We don't want to keep calling it fuzzy. It's a bit insulting. So they came up with Cohn, one of the major researchers, came up with the front end of innovation to give it its proper title. We're sort
Yeah.
of trying to get away from fuzzy.
So I guess I've not utilized the term front end of innovation, but I've talked with lots of different people about, and maybe you can tell me where the differences are. Maybe I'm talking about something slightly different, but I think about the gap between the academic research and actually having a product on the market, and that is a big leap. And it's a big gap that a lot of technology doesn't make. And I'm curious if that's kind of. I mean, it sounds like we're talking about somewhere
Yeah.
in that area anyway.
So usually that gap is split into two areas, is the front end and new product development now.
Okay.
So between getting it to market and doing
Okay.
the research. So the product development is still the biggest activity. That's multiple years usually, depending on the complexity of the medical device, between 2 to 5 years usually. The front end, usually takes less than a year to accomplish, even a complex medical device. Go and talk to your users and your customers to collect the market research data, understand the market in general. Takes 6 months to a year. So it's quite a short period compared to product development or the basic science stuff or commercialization, which never actually ends. Um, so it's quite a short period, but it's quite contained. And the activities we have to do are quite uh, understood now.
Okay.
But I'll get onto some of the problems with the front end and why it still needs to be researched and understood a little bit more. But
Yeah.
yeah, we've been looking at this for 30 years.
So, and how does one start with this? The reason I ask that is I'm trying to imagine, or I guess place myself in the scenario. So someone, is it an academic researcher who has a technology, or is it a physician who has a problem they're facing? And what goes through their mind and how they go through this process
Okay,
versus how
so
it should?
a really good visual to get your head around is this problem is the Design Council Double Diamond. And you can Google this, called the UK Design Council Double Diamond. And it's basically just two diamond shapes, rhombuses, stuck together. And what this represents is the front end, the two major activities within the front end of divergent and convergent thinking. So the first part of the front end, before you begin, to answer your question, before you begin, is a person has recognized an unmet clinical need. Either a surgeon in a surgery, a salesperson, or hospital staff have said that clinical need is not being met very well or not at all. And that's really the genesis of the front end. And they might, depending on their background, might go backwards to find out some technologies, some new technologies or new science that help meet that new clinical unmet need, or they might start advancing to start looking at technologies available. So the first part of the diamond, sort of the divergent part of the diamond where you're going up, is looking at all of the technologies available, understanding the problem, collecting all that data. And then once you think you've got enough data, you start to converge, looking through the data, sorting it out, affinitizing it, to use a fancy word, to get to a point of, okay, this is the problem we need to solve, and this is roughly how we're going to do it. Then the second part of the diamond is more divergent thinking, is where you're concepting, you're ideating to come up with lots of different solutions to meet that need. And then you converge again, you start throwing out the solutions, converging some solutions into a single proof of concept. And that's the solution to the unmet need, is the end of the front end. And that's when it goes into the new product development process and is got the engineering requirements, the testing, the verification, manufacturing, all that part brings it to an actual physical sellable medical device.
Okay. And I just pulled it up. I'm looking at it, and that is really interesting. I love the converging, diverging imagery there. I was very into experimental fluid dynamics in college, and we talked a lot about converging, diverging nozzles, and it's just bringing back a lot of memories. But if I'm thinking about this front end of innovation, and you mentioned a few of the different people who might start to go down that path, and they're on the very beginning, I suppose they're on the diverging part of that double diamond. What are the things that they, that consistent, I would imagine there's lots of different consistent pitfalls. That's usually there's lots of different ways to do things wrong, very few things to do things right. Can you speak to that a little bit?
So yeah, so the
Whichever
front
way you
end,
want to start. Yeah.
yeah, okay. Obviously, in the divergent part, there's nothing, you can't do anything wrong. You're finding information, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And the only thing you can do wrong is not stopping when you should think probably stop and just keep going and collecting more and more information, which could be the problem. Um, but there's sort of areas that you need to look into. So, firstly, as I said, there's the market. Is there a market there? How big is the market? What's the price you could probably sell this thing for? Um, then what's the technology? Is the technology there? And then as it comes to the customer side, is it actually what somebody wants? Though there's an unmet clinical need, it doesn't mean anybody really wants it. We have lots of needs that we're never satisfied, but we're okay having that, not being satisfied. So that's where one of the things on design thinking is viability, feasibility, and desirability. Feasibility is technology, viability um, is there a business case for it? And
Absolutely.
desirability is, does somebody want it? Is it desirable enough? And if you can answer those three questions through the front end, that's the most critical aspect to boil it down into sort of basics there.
How are they able to? So when I think about that, there's different minds usually that think about converging and diverging. At least that's in the past that I've thought about this, constricting or expanding. Um, and my mind automatically goes to risk management when I think about those things, because when it comes to risk management, you have to be pretty expansive in your thinking. Okay, is there anything else? Is there anything else? Whereas engineers, they like to optimize and kind of neck down to a problem. It seems like it's two different mindsets that would be good at one or the other. I don't know if that's something you've seen or found, but how do you, what's the balance there with that creativity and the structure?
So yeah, that's exactly what divergent and convergent thinking is. So divergent thinking is the what people think is creativity, right? Coming up with crazy ideas, solutions, problems, and not having a critical eye on any of it. And just saying, okay, here's another idea. And just keep going and going, creating lots and lots of different concepts that are sort of around that problem. And the convergent thing is where you say, okay, you start ranking them and saying which meets those best, and you set certain criteria. One of the A great tool to use for this is quite easy is the Pugh Matrix,
Okay.
Pugh matrix, which helps you classify your concepts for different criteria. And the Pugh Matrix is one aspect of the what's it called? The House of Quality, DQE. You know the
Yeah.
Yeah, House of
Uh,
Quality. I can't explain it. It's really the complicated thing in design excellence and Six Sigma that I don't think anybody really uses anymore. So Pew Matrix is really helpful for that convergence. And as long as I think from a creative point of view, as long as people know that this is a divergent phase where we're coming up our ideas, but we need to get to a convergent phase within 4 weeks or 6 weeks. We need to stop this and move on to the next one. And then we need to switch our brains to be critical and not creative. Then you can get through the process a lot easier and involve all those different functions. We know, engineers and marketers and designers are typically the creative ones who come up with all these crazy ideas, and quality and regulatory may be the convergent people. That's an unfair generalization, right?
sure. Yeah.
But
But
um,
from an industry, I think it's fair, just from
yeah,
the industry itself and what's required of
but
a
that's why
person.
you need all those different functions to help control the process
Yeah.
to a certain, keep that creativity, but have a certain level of control as well.
At that level or at that early stage, it's hard to imagine even having something of a team, though. I mean, how does that work? What's a realistic team look like at that level in that stage?
So in the research I did, so I interviewed 9 teams doing all different medical devices and followed them through the front end for about 9 months to 12 months through all their activities, interviewed
Yeah.
them at certain stages to understand what they were doing, to understand from a medical device what the front end process was. So most of the teams consisted of an engineer, a lead engineer, maybe another engineer, a designer, usually an industrial designer of some sort because they're physical products, a marketeer, so a commercial person from a commercial perspective, and maybe a clinical representative, um, maybe a clinical engineer, they're sometimes called, or medical operations or scientific operations, medical affairs. Those type of people will bring in the clinical aspect view of it as well. Quality and regulatory really weren't involved in that part of the front end, but some of them, sometimes they were. Not the people I interviewed, but sometimes you get a quality engineer or manufacturing engineer who has a lot of experience and different ideas and concepts that can really help
Yeah.
the creative process.
Um, what were some of the patterns and some of the consistent things you saw across those teams? Because that had to be very interesting to interview those.
What they were doing or what they were
Well,
finding.
I guess so when I think of like interviewing multiple people doing all the same but different things. I would guess that they're all doing it differently, or yeah, but at the same time, they're trying to accomplish a similar goal, trying to get a medical
Yeah.
device to market. So there are some themes and patterns I would expect to show up from a best practice standpoint. And so I'm curious what some of those might have been.
So so in the front end, best practices in medical devices, particularly in surgical and orthopedics, right, is going to watch the surgery, going to see it done
Ah, yeah,
multiple times, videoing it, going back and reviewing the videos on your own, maybe having multiple cameras set up in the OR, not just watching what the surgeon's doing, but watching what the operating nurses are doing, the circulating nurses, all the other people in the OR, what
yeah,
they're doing, and what all the other medical devices are doing. You know, ORs have got hundreds of medical devices all operating at the same time. If you're developing a shoulder or a hip, that's just one medical device in that OR. But the staff are dealing with all of them. So you've got to
yeah,
think about the entire environment that your medical device works in. And that's all about understanding the user and usability. That's probably the number one thing that's really important is what we call ethnography or consumer ethnography or observation and um, interviews, semi-structured interviews afterwards, because we can get onto this, but there's techniques you can use to find the problems, the pain points that is not just reviewing the videos, it's looking at it with a critical eye of what the surgeon's saying or the staff are saying and what you're actually seeing them doing.
yeah. Well, let's talk about that. Because I think I would imagine the engineers who are building a medical device, I mean, maybe they've not been trained on how to watch somebody do something necessarily, but I mean, depending on if you're immersed in CAD or immersed in these uh, different tools, what are some of the different tools that are available to find those and pull those things out?
So from a SaaS perspective, the one of the best tools is called NVivo, NVIVO in life type of thing.
SaaS being software as software as a service.
Yeah, exactly. So that's where you can put all your videos and all your transcripts in, and you can start coding those and finding the codes and the themes that start to emerge. That's a really useful tool to capture all this data. Um, and you can put in your anything you find on patents because they're a useful source of information, surveys, etc., interview data, all into the NVivo, and it can start coding it. And it's got an AI now. Not sure it's great. I wouldn't use it quite yet. Could miss a few key points. But when you're reviewing this data, when you're trying to find the nuggets of information, those golden points that make your product better than everybody else's, that's the important thing. As an engineer and marketer, you can come up with 100 customer needs and you can produce an incremental product. Well done. Please don't
Yeah.
come again. But it's finding those two or three what we call customer insights. That's the ones that make it special and solve that problem, particularly for that customer. So in my research, looking not just at what the teams were doing, but what the the literature said, I found 10 points that are probably the really critical things you need to look for. And we can go through those if you like. I know 10's a
Yeah.
lot. 10's a long
Well, I
list.
I had one question because you talked I want to just revisit the double diamond just for just a moment, and then I want to get into those 10. But the converging time, you said one of the problems is people don't stop early, or maybe they stop too early. What's the How do you know when you're done? And maybe these 10 will help us understand that if you've gone through all these, I would assume, or it just how do you define that as far as when you're done?
um, you sort of don't. But
Yeah.
I'll get so um, you're never sort of done researching. That's why we have multiple generations of products. Um, but
That's true. Yeah.
uh,
Okay.
but what you do is I would say you go depending on your product you're researching is you go and do 5 to 10 visits to an hour, videos and interviews. Start analyzing that, and go and do another five. Start analyzing that, and you'll get to a point around about 30 that you get to what we call saturation point. You're not getting anything new, any new information out. So it's sort of giving you an indicator that you're done.
Yeah.
But it comes to that 80-20 rule, right? You'll get 80% of the information in your first 10, and the next 20, you'll get another 10%. Next 30, you only get another 4 or 5% of the information. So you never get to 100%.
Yeah.
But you've got to make that determination. And it's a bit like risk management, how many risks do you write on your FMEA? When do you know you've got to stop and move
Yeah.
on?
It can be an art versus a science. But yeah, okay, let's talk about the 10 things that you found because this is really cool.
So the first one is called a workaround. And this, everybody's experienced this. This is when your product you're using doesn't quite work right and you just start using it slightly different to get, you use your screwdriver as a hammer because you can't find your hammer. That's called a workaround.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you're watching surgeons, you can see lots of workarounds. And typically, the user doesn't know they're doing a workaround. And that's where the video helps. And you can watch a surgeon using the existing product and go, why are they doing that? That's not how it was designed. And then you figure out, actually, if I change this product to do this, they can use it both ways. And they may solve it. Um, affordances. Affordances are a handle on a door affords you way to open the door. A grip on a hammer, I use a hammer because everyone knows what a grip on a hammer is an affordance. It affords you the way to hold it. And knowing where, especially medical instruments, you put the affordance or the grips is really critical to the usability. So always look out where the surgeon is holding that product or the user's holding that product. It might not be where the designer originally intended them to use it or hold it. And you can probably think of a lot of analogies on that one.
Yeah, it makes me think of design and everyday. What is that book? Design of Everyday Things, Affordances, and
Yeah.
Signifiers. Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Donald Norman was the
Donald
author
Norman.
of that one.
Yeah,
Yeah. Um, so the other one is when you're interviewing people. So these are usability problems, the first two. The next one is overgeneralization. So when someone's talking, they'll use an even absolute descriptive. I always do this. I always do that. And when you look at the videos, you find out they never do that. So, and you're like, okay, so they think one thing, but they're actually doing another. Why? And this is where another quality thing comes is the 5 whys, right? Why? You ask it 5 ways and you could probably get down to the right answer.
yeah.
Next is metaphorical glosses. So they are when they basically gloss over the problem. Oh, it's not a problem. Don't worry about it. And you're like, you might be thinking, okay, they didn't say it's a problem, so we'll ignore it. But they're just being nice sometimes to the designers sitting in front of them. And you've got to think, okay, what is the real problem here? Is there a problem? So start to investigate that a little bit when they gloss over issues.
Are there any specific examples for that one? Because I think I can think of a couple of specific examples for some of the others. That one uh, I may just need to dig deep, I guess. So any thoughts? Any
Oh,
specific?
examples.
Yeah.
Um, I had one in my career where the the hex screwdriver would never engage in the hex properly. But because we're using KOLs, key opinion leader surgeons, who were really expert, they always got it to work. And they were like, oh, no, it's not a problem. I didn't find it a problem. And we were like, I'm sure there's an issue, but nobody's saying it's a problem until it got into the field. And then some of the other surgeons who hadn't gone through the design process and understood the problem were really encountering issues and we had to fix it quickly.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that
Okay.
would have been one that, and that's a point when we back to the teams, we always engage key opinion leader surgeons, the top tier surgeons to help us design our products, and they're sometimes not the best because they're not the users, the main user actually using it, and they will do lots of workarounds, know how to fix problems very easily because they're so experienced. You've got to when you develop, especially in MPD and design validation, use the majority of surgeons who are going to be using it, the jobbing surgeons, to make sure you get your proper validation, not the
Yeah.
KOLs.
I could see somebody, especially if they have a little bit of vested interest, they've built some of this, and so yeah, it works. It works. Yeah, okay, I'm with you now. I can see that. Okay.
Yeah. Next, number five, claims of idiosyncrasy. This
Okay.
is um, someone says, well, I'm a bit different than everybody else. I do it this way. And
Yeah.
everybody, I've had a unique career. And you're like, I think I found five or six people who've got the same career, but so, so that they've got an idiosyncrasy somehow, right? And they're saying they state it quite clearly. So that's something is like, why is this person saying it's so different than everybody else? Are they different or are they the same? That problem needs to be investigated deeper.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. That's good. I can imagine that one being especially interesting. Okay.
and this is number six is one that probably most people are aware of. Is called areas of disjuncture. This is where somebody's, as I think I mentioned, somebody's saying they do something, but actually in life, in surgery, they're doing something completely different. But they think they're doing it this way. And I've seen a lot of that between the difference between the interview and the video. That's why you got to go through the transcript. When you're watching the video, go through the transcript at the same time and try and pick up why they say, oh, I used the screwdriver this way. And then you see it like, no, they're not.
Yeah.
Actually, video, they're not even using the screwdriver, they're using the wrench or the hammer.
Yeah. Interesting. And I guess you come through at some point. I'm trying to think through the process of the actual utilization of that video and transcript. Um, when you see that, I guess the goal in that moment, as they've said this one thing and they're doing this other thing, um, is the idea to get into their mind of what they feel like should be versus what is? Is that really what you're after?
Yeah, sometimes they're remembering that what they're trained to do.
Okay.
And because they're talking to you, they want to make sure they're telling you how they
Proper.
should be doing it,
Yeah.
not the way they're really doing it. Um, and you don't necessarily want to design the product the way they should be doing it. Really design it the way they are doing it because that will get the best results. Because
Yeah.
they're doing that. It goes back to that workaround. They're doing it for a reason. They may not know the reason. It's the team's job to find out the reason.
And I guess the motivation behind this disjuncture communication is maybe even embarrassment. Well, I do it this other way, but I mean, yeah. So you're talking about the way you were trained in doing it. That's really interesting. Okay.
What have we got next? Here is disjunction. We'll cover that one. Dissonance. So this is where something, and this is in your mind, doesn't quite stand up. So dissonance is difference between what you think is going to happen and what actually is happening. And your mind is basically split in two, trying to understand the problem. And this is when you, from a researcher side, so when you're actually looking at the data, if you experience that as like, there's something going on here, there's a gut feel problem going on, you need to stop and think about it and not just move on because your subconscious is telling you something that you may not be aware of. And that comes back to creativity as well, which
And do you have any examples of this one? Because I'm very curious about that. And I'm sure this is going to vary individual by individual and the person actually sitting there experienced it and so on. But how did you observe it? I mean, if
oh
this is one of the
gosh.
10 that you established from these 10 or from these 9 teams that you watched, um, how did you pull this one out? I'm curious. It just seems like this one's so deep within someone.
Yeah, well, that's the problem with the research. So sometimes when you're interviewing people after they've done the job, um, you, they you're interviewing researchers after they've done the job. You've got the same problems of these 10 that I've
Yeah.
just mentioned. Interviewing surgeons, you're like two steps away. So they have an interpretation of it as well. But sometimes you pick up things they're saying. It's like I just didn't believe him
Yeah.
when he was saying that. There was no proof. I couldn't see in the video, but I just didn't believe him. So
Yeah.
I,
Yeah.
uh, I, and I decided to ignore what they were saying and do it this way because I think that was right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Just listening to that gut feel. Yeah.
as an engineer, it's your imperative to do what you feel right as well, right? You don't just do what the customer says because that could lead to a terrible product.
Yeah.
Engineers and marketers and designers, we have our skills as well that we can apply to the product we're developing and interpret how we should think it works as too.
There's a phrase that comes to mind, just you having said that. I think it's, if see if I can remember it correctly, a craftsman will build you exactly what you ask for. An artist will build you what you didn't know you need.
Yeah,
Like
that's a
that.
good one. Yeah.
And so that's what makes think of with this dissonance.
Yeah.
Okay, what about trigger of use?
Triggers of use. This so this is a little bit about workarounds as well, but this is about unconventional uses for products. And that hammer and screwdriver problem that I keep coming back to. But if they're using a product, maybe not off-label, I won't go that far, but using an instrument that's not been designed to do it that way, but is solving a major clinical problem, maybe that is the use for that product and it needs to be developed for that actual clinical application. And there's a few, there's a few pharmaceuticals that were developed for some application, or clinical application, found out they were better in other applications. Um, but
Yeah.
yeah, there's lots of medical devices that have been developed for one application, and then surgeons start using it for a different application, and it works great, and then we've developed it for another one. So you should always watch out for cross cross clinical applications that the products can be used for.
Yeah, I can see that. Because, I mean, you would
So
think
trauma,
every, go ahead.
cannulated trauma screws for hip were then used in the ankle and used in the spine. Now, spine screws are properly developed for the spine, but they were originally just Synthes cannulated screws.
Yeah. Yeah, seeing how people use things. Okay, trigger of use. So if that one makes total sense now that you explain it. Okay. Context of product use.
Okay, so this is how and where it's being used, the environment. So as engineers, sometimes we or designers, sometimes we get focused on the product and that where it's actually being used in the body, in the anatomy, and who's using it. But the context is really important, and we have to design for that. Usability engineering tells us we have to start designing for this. But
Yeah.
from the videos or from your research, trying to expand a little bit, just not from the OR, maybe further into the hospital, how it circulates around the hospital. Cleanability is an important one, sterilizability, how that, if you're talking about instrument tray type of thing, how that's transported, how the sales people throw it in the back of their trunk and ship it around and to the next hospital. That affects the entire product because a salesperson is a user of the instrument as well, not just the people in the OR. Try and think of how, and we call it journey mapping, right? Journey mapping is mapping the entire journey of the product through its life cycle, not just its point of where it's actually used.
Yeah, and I use this term and I probably shouldn't. I should probably align my terms with that, the product life cycle and journey. But the supply chain of a medical device as it goes through. So, and as it changes hands from the shipper to the nurse to the surgeon to the trash can to the whatever, you think
Yeah.
about the whole entire thing, that makes sense.
Yeah. And then, where does the packaging go depending on where the implant goes? They're two different problems that people have to solve somewhere.
Yeah. Or if it's sterilized and the nurse opens it up, throws the thing away, puts it in her pocket or his pocket, and walks into the room, what do you do with that? And so yeah, lots of different situations like that.
Yeah. And so the last one is customization. And lots of companies do this. Sports sneaker companies do this. You can go onto the Nike website and design your own Nike trainers with different colors. That's customization. Um, there's a really famous one. I think it's Cheetos chips. I've heard. Have you heard this one?
No, I don't think so.
So this is America. It's been a long time since I've been in America, but there's the Cheetos, which are the hot and spicy ones.
Yeah.
So in the factory where Cheetos were made, they're just the cheesy ones. One of the workers was from Mexico, and he wanted spicy cheese, and submitted his idea to the Cheetos senior management, and they were said, "Hell no, we're not doing that." So he took a bag home with him, which hadn't been flavored yet, and spent a year or two playing with different flavors and different spices and coating his Cheetos. And then he just made his own Cheetos. Um, and then his friends started buying the Cheetos off him.
Yeah,
And then the factory went, okay, we want to mass produce this. And now you obviously can buy it wherever you like. And the guy's a wealthy guy for customizing his Cheetos to exactly how he wanted them.
I never heard that story. That's really
That's a
good.
good one.
Yeah.
Good
Um,
innovation story.
yeah, absolutely. Well, that's a lot. So, of these 10, of the 9 teams that you were they all kind of used or referenced, or was it just a smattering from this team had about 4 or 5 of these, and then this other team had 3 or 4, and but you saw a lot of overlap, or what? Were there
Yeah.
anything that fell out? I'm always curious if there's things that fell out from your list because you had 10. Yeah, I'm sure there were other things that this was sort of on the table, but then you know what? It's not really. I don't know if
Mm,
it.
can't remember.
No, I'm guessing. Yeah, that's.
I guess most of it, because it's 10 is quite a long
Oh
number.
yeah, yeah,
There was probably ones that I consolidated into the top 10. They said, okay, that's similar to this one. I don't want to go over 10 because people can't
yeah,
remember over five. So having 10
yeah.
is too. Um, there's a lot of crossover between a few of these anyway. They're sort of similar but different.
So one of the things I'd be curious about too. So if I'm a team, I think lists like this are incredibly helpful to get my brain kind of tuned and calibrated to what I should be looking for and thinking about. How do you how do you recommend making sure you're comprehensive enough with all of these? Is it I'm going to go look through it with this lens. I'm going to use the workaround lens, and I'm going to look for that, and then I'm going to focus for affordances or triggers of use. Or what's the best way to utilize this list?
Exactly. That's
Yeah.
sadly, that's what
Okay.
you just can't keep all of the ideas in your head at the same time
Yeah.
while you're watching a video. And it
Yeah.
does take a long time. You know, 1 hour video could probably takes you between 5 and 8 hours to analyze. So it's
Yeah.
a significant amount of work just to keep going back through it, looking at things, reading the transcriptions, um, breaking down, coding everything into the buckets and starting to affinitize all those problems into themes. So yeah,
Yeah.
it is about just going through it over and over again, um, and getting a bit bored.
Yeah.
But bored, as researchers are starting to find out, boring is the new creative space. If you're bored, you start to be creative.
Yeah. Yeah.
And as I said, use the 5 whys a little bit. You know, why?
Yeah. Why are they doing this? Why are they doing
And you can irritate your customers by using the 5 whys on them. If why until they think you're a child and won't run away.
that? Well, yeah, kids are some of the best designers. I have a 5-year-old myself who builds anything out of anything, and
Yeah.
yeah, it's pretty impressive.
One
Um,
of the good to answer your question, one of the good frameworks is the Jobs to be Done framework by Christensen. That's a real because his thesis on this one is people don't buy products, they buy solutions. And
yeah,
his analogy is you're not buying a power drill, you're buying a hole.
yeah,
You need a hole, you don't need a power drill.
right.
And that opens up your creativity. It's like holes can be created in all sorts of ways. You just get a laser beam and burn a hole into your wall to put a nail in, if you a screwdriver in or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking about that actually a while back, and because I was on a job site with some friends, and I realized that a lot of us you might buy a hammer, and you can use a hammer just as well as you can in a lot of things in a lot of places, but some people buy a tool for the status on the site too. And I don't know if that's, if you take that to robotics with certain hospitals and so on, but there's lots of different, I think truly understanding what they're trying to solve, whether it's status from a marketing standpoint or truly just
Mm.
trying to put a hole in the wall. What are you actually trying to do? Maybe we can even be a little bit too uh, not specific enough or comprehensive enough with that analysis as well. I've realized,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. If you're going with Milwaukee or DeWalt or
yeah,
Ryobi.
I'm a DeWalt man myself. But yeah, that is very cool. Any if so, is there any advice you give every startup or early stage company who's going through this front end of innovation? I mean, the 10, I think you've given a lot of pieces of advice, but if you were to sum this up into one piece of advice or one takeaway for the audience, what would that thing be?
Test your unmet clinical need. Because that is the North Star of all your research you're going to be doing and all your divergent and convergent thinking. It's all around solving that unmet clinical need. And that needs to be tested all the time.
Yeah,
Not just at the beginning of the front end or the end of the front end. Um, as you move through the years and years of developing it, you always have to go back and test if that unmet clinical need is still exists and is it real. Um, I think that would be the one piece of advice because things move, technology changes,
yeah,
people change, perceptions change, regulations change around you without the externalities are huge. So always test
yeah.
the unmet clinical need.
I look at that as the little v of validation. So you're always validating your user needs with the doctors you come to. Is this really the need we're after? You know, you're not necessarily going through validation, putting it in their hand to see if you met your user needs, but the little v of validating what you're actually trying to accomplish. I think that's good
Yeah.
advice. Test those clinical needs. Where can people find you to learn more about what you're doing, your research, or the work that you're doing now?
Yeah, so that you can go on my LinkedIn page, Stuart Grant. That'll take you, and I'll love to connect to anybody. Send me a message if you've got any questions. And my company website is archetype-medtech.com. You can go in there and submit any questions you have there. Happy to help and happy to give anybody advice on the front end or NPD in medtech.
Okay, and we'll add those links to the show notes so that people can easily find that as well. And really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to uh, learning more about this. I love the list that you have, and I'm just going to run through it real fast one more time in case people weren't, or maybe they were driving and now they're sitting in their driveway. I'm thinking, what were all the 10? The workarounds, affordances, overgeneralizations, metaphorical glosses, probably my favorite phrase, claims of idiosyncrasy, areas of disjuncture, dissonance, trigger of use, context of product use, and user customization. That's fantastic. I really appreciate it. And thank you for sharing. Really appreciate all the work you're doing. And
Cheers.
yeah, excited to meet in
Thanks,
person one of these
Etienne.
days. All right. Take care,
Cheers.
Stuart.
Bye.
We'll see y'all later. Take care.